Over the past 6 months, I've been using a device that's changed everything that I do. From the way that I take notes or just complete regular work at school, to the way that I consume media and all the leisure time that I spend at home, to productivity and creativity projects like these videos. And that device is the iPad Air 4. I've been using it since launch day, and this is my review. The specs of the iPad Air 4 are largely similar to the iPhone 12 series. You've got a 10.9-inch liquid retina display on the front, an A14 processor paired with 4 gigs of RAM, dual stereo speakers, 64 or 256 gigs of storage. But one of the main highlights of this new iPad Air was that it had taken on the iPad Pro design. However, before we talk about that, I just quickly want to talk about the sky blue finish. This isn't really a blue. It's pastel-y, so sort of like the color of the chins on the iMacs. Thing is that it's a very, very light sky blue. It's almost like a borderline silver, if you ask me. Unless you're in like sunlight or something, it doesn't seem as blue as it does on the Apple website. Anyhow, the iPad Air has pretty much the same body size as the 11-inch iPad Pro. It's only 0.2 millimeters thicker, coming in at 6.1 millimeters as opposed to 5.9. But it doesn't really make a difference. It's also only 1 pound in weight, which is, honestly, you feel how light this is, and it's definitely not really going to make a difference in your bag or wherever you carry it, because it's honestly quite light. On the bottom, you've got the 5 gigabit per second USB-C port, and on the back, you've got the smart connector, which enables this iPad to be used with the smart keyboard and the Magic Keyboard. So let's talk about that display. It's 10.9 inches, which is 0.1 inches smaller than the 11-inch iPad Pro, and it's not an entirely different size. In fact, it's just a 0.1 inch larger bezel on the iPad Air, which, to be honest, I appreciate. I'm getting a couple accidental touches with this, so I'd assume that with the iPad Pro I'd have way more. One of the trade-offs that Apple made here on the iPad Air was taking away ProMotion, or a 120Hz display. The iPad Air only has a 60Hz display, which I don't think is really going to matter much for most people, because this is targeted at average consumers, and average consumers aren't really going to care about having the fastest feeling display ever. In fact, Apple themselves said that most people won't really notice the difference between ProMotion and 60Hz regular motion. In reality, ProMotion doesn't offer a functional advantage over 60Hz. I mean, sure, yeah, everything feels faster and you're doing everything, and it's just higher response times, I guess, but in terms of how the iPad functions, it's not really as big of a difference as, say, the CPU. The display gets up to 500 nits of brightness, which is personally fine. I do most of my work near a window, and it's bright enough to support that. It's also got the P3 color gamut and supports True Tone and the Apple Pencil. The display's honestly been great. I do have the paper-like screen protector, which I'll talk about in another video. It hasn't really hindered the display experience, and it's just a wonderful display. When I'm watching videos and Netflix shows, it's just super immersive, paired with the really strong speakers, and it's great for doing pretty much anything. Back when I used to make my own thumbnails, I would edit them in Lightroom here, and this was great for that. While we're on the topic of immersiveness, let's talk about the speakers. So it's got 2 speakers, though it appears as if there are 4, and it's really not a big deal. Apple just adds cosmetic speakers for symmetry. It's these 2. For content that supports it, these have great stereo separation. And even though they're not listed as surround sound speakers or supporting Dolby Atmos and all, for some content, I have been legitimately fooled that it was some sort of surround sound experience. So these speakers are amazing. But also, I thought you would probably want to know this, the iPad Air does not come with a headphone jack. That is my single most hated thing about the iPad Air 4. Another highlight feature of the iPad Air 4 is the Touch ID power button, which replaces Face ID. which I guess is also a Pro feature now. Originally, when I heard about this, I was kind of scared as to how it would turn out, because on an iPad, having Touch ID on the power button, how would they place it, and how would just unlocking it work? And I've got to say that Apple did an amazing job. The Touch ID power button is super fast. Like, sometimes I'll just have my iPad, like, I'll just press the button and it's already just logged me in. There's this cool thing that Apple does where once you've unlocked it, like originally it'll say Touch ID, but then as soon as you've unlocked it, it says rest to open, and that sort of fills up as you have your finger on the button. It's really quick. It's like half a second. And I think that it's just a nice little thing that Apple threw in there that was kind of cool. My one and only complaint with it is just that it's placed kind of weirdly. And not only that, but the size of it. And they kind of go hand in hand. Sometimes when I'm moving it around, it might accidentally hit something. And because it's so big, it'll sometimes just turn off accidentally. And I also think that the button's a bit thinner than the power button on the iPad Pros. If you are going to be using this with a Magic Keyboard or some keyboard attachment, it might also be a bit inconvenient. Definitely not as convenient as Face ID. Moving on to the inside of the iPad, let's talk about performance. It comes equipped with the A14 Bionic processor and 4 gigs of RAM, which is quite a powerful dynamic duo. It's great for day-to-day use. For simple, easy tasks, it breezes through them fairly quickly, and for more intensive ones, it handles them quite well. I edit all of my videos, which are shot in 4K on this iPad, and it handles them really, really easily. I think once or twice I've had editing applications crash on it, but aside from that, it has been stellar. It does struggle in some places, and primarily this is the one that I guess I am met with the most, and that is when I'm transferring footage through an SD card through a dongle into the iPad from the camera. And that, it's just like, it completely brings the iPad down to its knees. It can barely play back anything, and when I press share so I can actually download the files themselves, it takes like 5 or 10 seconds for the thing to pop up to just respond to my touching. Battery life on this iPad has been stellar. I consider myself a moderate to heavy user, and for me, this has been great. On days where I barely do anything, so basically just surfing social media and the web and just watching a bunch of videos, I can get north of 8 to even 10 hours of screen on time. Whereas on days where my workload is heavier, I guess, and I'm doing video editing, transferring files, and attending school meets on the iPad, usually I'll get about 4 to 6 hours in those cases. Regardless, it's been amazing. It's got a 12 megapixel rear camera, which I am positive nobody cares about. I personally shoot photos on my tablet, but I'm guessing that the majority of you guys don't. But just for the record, it can shoot at up to 4K 60 FPS. But it's not the same quality as on the iPhones. More importantly, the front-facing camera is 7 megapixels and can shoot 1080p 60 FPS video, and it's great. FaceTime and everything, it's very clear. It does not support animated emoji. It doesn't have a true depth sensor, so it can't support that, and that's why it also doesn't have Face ID. I feel like one of the only major cons about this iPad is just that you've only got 2 storage options, and that's 64 and 256 gigs. Now to answer the final question, is the iPad Air worth it? And I have to say that I have never, ever felt so confident in recommending a device to someone, because this is definitely worth it. The fact that we have M1 on iPads but no Pro app support yet, and I'm really, really badly hoping that this does get announced in WWDC, but if we don't get Pro app support, then I guess that will honestly make the iPad Air a better deal, because that's the point where you don't even need the 2021 iPad Pros, because all that M1, all that power is just wasted there, and this is just so much of a better deal. Or even if not this, the 2018 and 2020 iPad Pros that you could find on the used or refurbished market, which are still great iPad Pros. And I feel like this is perfect for people who want to get an iPad Pro-like experience with some Pro features without having to pay the Pro price. That's a lot of pros. Pun intended. And there are going to be sacrifices like 120 Hz, Thunderbolt, the lack of an ultra-wide camera and a LiDAR scanner, because we totally all want that on our iPad. But this is just a really perfect middle ground. Thank you so much for watching. If you are still here, thank you for making it until this point in the video. If you did enjoy this video and you want to see more from me, feel free to drop a like and subscribe, but that's it for me.